Why does football earn so little money? Europe's top 10 most valuable football clubs have an average operating profit of less than $100 million. After taxes, interest payments, and loan repayments, many of these clubs actually operate at a loss. But why, even with such modest financial indicators, more and more investors are investing in football, and the geography of owners of top football clubs is expanding year by year? Why does a large American business invest the most in such expensive European football? And why do the regular losses of your football club not prevent you from generating multi-billion-dollar profits, although selfishness, personal ambitions, and shady deals come into play here? First, we need to understand how football came to be called a business in general. Football has roots going back thousands of years, with early versions played in ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and even China. But modern football began in England during the mid-19th century. It was there that the first official football regulatory body was created. This organization established a set of rules and formed several football leagues. At first, football was purely an amateur sport. However, the game spread worldwide, thanks to British sailors and soldiers. These men, part of Britain's colonial efforts in the late 19th century, introduced football to many colonies across different continents. And by the early 20th century, there was growing pressure to create an international organization to manage and regulate football globally. This led to the founding of FIFA. British football leaders were initially skeptical and dismissed an invitation from the 7 founding countries to join FIFA. From that point on, football began evolving into a more professional and organized sport. Across Europe, groups of students, workers, seminarians, and miners began forming professional football clubs that eventually joined leagues. These clubs were often connected to a specific place, like a factory or a seminary, or they sought support from local businessmen and influential people over time. This marks the first steps toward the commercialization of football in the early 20th century. Meanwhile, FIFA was working hard to expand its influence. More and more countries joined the organization, and for the first time, football was included in the Olympic Games. The future of the entire football industry appeared incredibly bright, with all signs pointing to its sustained growth and enduring success. However, at that moment, no one realized that an upcoming event would turn the tide of human history. The First World War profoundly impacted Europe. In many countries, football championships were cancelled or suspended. Players went to fight on the front lines or worked in military factories. Businesses and industries focused on supporting their armies, so the football industry, which was just starting to grow, came to a halt like many other sectors. Even during the war, football didn't completely disappear. Soldiers on the front lines found comfort in their favorite game, which was sometimes used for recruitment campaigns or even to bring temporary truces between opposing sides through friendly matches. FIFA faced enormous challenges during the war. It had to carefully navigate the interests of different countries to protect the global infrastructure it had built and prepare for football's post-war future. However, when the war ended, the world was far from united. Europe was divided into competing blocs and alliances. By 1930, FIFA had over 40 member countries. At this point, the organization struggled financially and decided to take its most considerable risk yet, hosting the first ever World Cup in Uruguay. Leaving the orbit of the International Olympic Committee, FIFA organized the tournament. Despite numerous obstacles, including the Great Depression and the global economic crisis of the 30s, the World Cup became a triumph for FIFA and the entire football industry. Over the next decade, the sport continued its recovery and development. But after the challenging 30s came the even tougher 40s. This time, a new war engulfed the entire world. Unlike 25 years earlier, when competitions and tournaments were partially suspended in some countries, professional football was abandoned completely during 5 years of bloodshed and devastation. The Second World War caused unimaginable destruction. It seemed that rebuilding industries, including football, would take far longer and require much greater effort than before. But then, something incredible happened. A miracle that impacted all of humanity. A technological miracle. New technologies became the driving force behind the recovery and growth of football, as well as the rest of the world. One major development was the introduction of jet passenger planes in the 1950s, which marked the beginning of modern air travel. These planes allowed athletes from different countries and continents to travel to competitions much faster. This made it easier for football authorities to organize intercontinental tournaments, greatly expanding the sport's reach. At the same time, Europe finally established its own governing football organization, which quickly began hosting tournaments for clubs and national teams across the continent. And of course, the 50s marked the rise of television, which played a key role in creating the golden era of football in the 20th century. People worldwide now have the opportunity to watch live football matches instead of listening to reports on the radio. However, this change didn't happen overnight. In the early days, TVs were expensive, and not every family could afford one, but everything changed in the 60s. Around the same time, the market for football television rights started to grow across Europe, allowing broadcasters to bring the game into more homes. In addition to TV revenue, tournament organizers also began making significant profits from ticket sales. In 1973, the German club Eintracht became the first football team in history to play a match with a sponsor's logo on its jersey. Within a year, other German clubs followed this trend, and soon commercial partnerships spread across Europe. What started as a simple game for the working class quickly transformed into a global spectacle, drawing in a much wider audience and attracting major investors and businesses. A key moment in this growing commercialization of football came in 1983, when an unprecedented deal was made in England. Broadcaster ITV paid over £5 million for the rights to broadcast 2 seasons of the English Premier League. Before this, only FIFA could secure million-dollar deals for televising the World Cup, which happened every 4 years. However, this English deal showed the football world that broadcasters were willing to pay huge sums for club football as well. After this agreement, the value of TV contracts for various leagues began to grow rapidly. We've reached a point where the football industry generates significant income. Today, the budget of every football club in the top 5 leagues is built on 3 main revenue streams: matchday income, media and television rights, and commercial income. While traditional TV deals have been crucial, new technologies have expanded this category. Digital platforms now include streaming services, social media, and online content distribution, which aren't as tied to paid subscriptions as TV, but focus on reaching a much wider audience through open access models. Finally, commercial income includes sponsorship and partnership deals. This category covers logos on jerseys, slogans displayed in stadiums, ads on social media, and other ways clubs work with commercial partners to generate revenue. I pointed out that this model is mainly used in the top 5 leagues. In more minor leagues, the revenue triangle expands to include 2 additional sources of income, even though the amounts are much smaller. These extra sources are prize money from tournaments and income from selling players. However, only clubs with robust systems for developing young talent and solid connections in the transfer market can rely on these categories when planning their budgets. These clubs groom young players and sell them under the best terms for the club once they mature. For clubs without a history of player sales or a good reputation in transfers, including estimated transfer income in the budget can be risky. If the reality doesn't meet expectations, the club might struggle to cover its costs and increase its debt. Clubs from Portugal and the Netherlands have traditionally excelled at using this strategy. But there's one crucial thing to remember. Most of these profitable clubs dominate their leagues. They compete with only a few serious rivals, and even if they don't win the championship, they are very likely to qualify for the Champions League, which covers a large part of their budget. Because of this, these clubs don't need to spend heavily on transfers every year or significantly increase their commercial income to stay ahead of competition from outside their their circle. This gives them flexibility and allows them to experiment. They can also give more playing time to young talents, showcasing them to potential buyers. If a mid to lower ranked club in the Premier League focuses on developing and selling players for profit, it will most likely drop out of the league in the next few seasons. While there are exceptions in other top leagues, the real question is whether these clubs, like Portuguese and Dutch teams, can successfully follow this strategy for decades. But let's return to the original strategy and look at how revenue works using a real example. Manchester United, England's most valuable football club, has increased its value by 9% over the past year. The Red Devils trail only Real Madrid, which has been the best football club of the last decade and has topped the rankings for the third year in a row. And this is nuts. This team hasn't won the Premier League title since 2013 and hasn't advanced past the Champions League quarterfinals since 2010. The truth is that for years, United's management has prioritized the interests of investors over the fans. I'll explain exactly what that means in just a moment, but first, let's finish discussing income. We all understand that matchday income depends greatly on a team's performance. It makes sense. The more exciting football a team plays, the more they win, the more tournaments they join, the more often the stadium will fill up, and the more weighty the management's arguments will be when ticket prices rise. However, matchday revenue has become less important for Manchester. Since their last championship win in 2013, the share of income from match days has dropped to just 18%, even though the club has the second largest stadium in the Premier League. Despite the team's poor results, United's attendance has stayed stable over the years. At the same time, while attendance stayed steady, the club's commercial income has continued to grow. The strength of the United brand is so great that even without significant victories and trophies, it remains the main magnet in the Premier League for sponsors and partners. Scandals, constant coaching changes, and even lackluster football can't stop companies from wanting to work with United. Their commercial income keeps growing no matter how the team performs. So if you were the club's managers and focused on business rather than football, why would you prioritize fan interests or try to give them what they want to see? Instead, you could keep them engaged with affordable tickets and season passes while focusing on profitable commercial deals. Last year, the Red Devils made a historic deal with Adidas worth $1 billion. And it wasn't their neighbors in Manchester who collected trophies year after year, but United who made the deal. The club's total revenue has doubled over the past 10 years, and in the last 2 seasons, Manchester United has set a new Premier League record for revenue. Even in their worst season, finishing 8th, they still reached record earnings. However, a key economic principle is that as your wealth grows, your needs grow as well. In football, where competition becomes more brutal every year, this growth can quickly become uncontrollable. Unlike income, a football club's expenses have many more categories and subcategories. While United's total revenue has doubled over the past 10 years, their player salaries alone have more than doubled. Additionally, the club has a negative transfer balance of £1.4 billion during this period. This is a very poor result, and the club's scouting department often makes costly mistakes. In every football club, salaries and transfer payments are the biggest expenses, but for most casual fans, transfers usually get way more attention. And that makes sense. Transfer fees are big, flashy numbers that the media loves to hype up. They're easier to report on and talk about. But the truth is, salaries are way more important. A club's wage bill is closely linked to how well the team performs on the pitch. There's even a mathematical model for the Premier League that proves this connection, using data from 7 full seasons. And guess what? There are only 2 exceptions to this trend. First, there's Tottenham, a club that consistently outperforms its relatively modest wage bill. Then there's Manchester, where it's the total opposite, a bloated salary budget with results that don't match up at all. Over time, United has basically become trapped by its own reputation. Even without claiming the highest awards, the Red Devils simply cannot be uncompetitive, which means the club must invest money in strengthening the squad at the level of more stable and strong competitors. But here's the catch. Every club and player they negotiate with knows this. They know United's desperate to maintain their status, so they use that leverage to squeeze out better deals for themselves. And that's not even counting the effects of inflation or the way billionaire owners keep inflating the market with over-the-top deals. Still, let's not let United off the hook. Over the past decade, they've had the worst player recruitment and personnel strategy in football. No No one comes close. It's honestly mind-blowing how badly they've managed it. The main problem of modern football is that club revenues, unlike expenses, still have limitations. Matchday revenue is directly tied to the number of seats in the stadium. There's no way to increase this income without spending millions of dollars to rebuild or even build a new stadium. For example, United's new investor, Jim Ratcliffe, who bought 25% of the club's shares, has already invested over $300 million to improve Old Trafford's infrastructure. However, Ratcliffe is still considering tearing down the existing stadium and building a new one instead of just upgrading the current one. Revenues from TV rights, as we have already found out, have been steadily growing for 4 decades. However, there comes a point when this income seems to have reached its peak, but this doesn't apply to the Premier League, which once again shows how disconnected the elite English division is from the rest of European football. At the beginning of the year, the Premier League signed a new 4-year contract worth almost €8 billion, another record for the broadcasting market. On the other hand, Italy's Serie A couldn't convince its partners that its product deserved a bigger deal. Their new contract with the Sky Channel and streaming service DAZN decreased by 0.5% compared to the previous deal, even though the league had promised clubs an increase of at least €1 billion. Similarly, in 2020, the Bundesliga's broadcasters reduced their payments. The situation in France is even more difficult. Ligue 1 announced a bidding process for a new broadcaster to cover a 5-year cycle until 29. The starting price for the tender was set at €800 million per season, which was an increase from the €600 million they received under the previous deal. And it seems that this increase doesn't look so unaffordable. However, not a single broadcaster, including even current league partners, has entered into bidding with such figures. As a result, the first tender in the fall of last year failed and was postponed to the spring of 24. However, even then, Ligue 1 was unable to conclude a deal. Then came the complex negotiations that lasted all summer. Literally, a month before the start of the new season, the top French division didn't have a broadcaster, so the possibility of postponing the start of the championship was even discussed. At the end of the day, politicians had to step in, and Ligue 1 had no choice but to sign a deal for only €500 million per season. It was an absolute defeat for French football. And finally, in Spain, the new contract signed at the beginning of the year saw a drop to €900 million per season. It's interesting that the broadcasting market stagnates only in domestic leagues. So it's clear that the best way for clubs to grow their income is by boosting commercial revenue. This means finding new sponsors, breaking into fresh markets, and coming up with creative ways to connect with brands and fans. And United has shown that it's possible to crush it in this area, even if results on the field aren't great. But it still wasn't enough. Even if you max out your income in every category, you won't truly fix the club's overall finances without addressing expenses. You can set record revenues for 2 seasons in a row, but it won't save you from massive losses. This is why even the Premier League's most commercially successful club is still a business with super low profitability and limited growth potential. Unless, of course, you're using the club as a personal piggy bank. But more on that later. And let's not forget, there are cases where chasing commercial success backfires completely, leaving clubs drowning in debt instead of thriving. Alright, let's switch our focus to another example. Juve operates on a model similar to United's, but with even tighter limits on their income. The golden era of Serie A is long gone, so broadcasters aren't shelling out money anywhere near what the Premier League gets. On top of that, Juventus' stadium holds only half as many fans as Old Trafford. Because of these limitations, commercial income is even more crucial for Juve's budget. In the summer of 18, the club's management rolled out a bold new direction aimed at boosting their commercial appeal. They unveiled a sleek new logo, partnered with Netflix for a documentary series, and made the biggest signing in their history. At the time, Juve had reached the Champions League final twice in the previous 3 years, but lost both times. The hope was that Cristiano would finally deliver the much-desired European trophy. But Ronaldo wasn't just seen as a game-changer on the field, he was also expected to transform the club's finances off it, and initially it looked like a masterstroke. Just the first week after his transfer, Juventus reported massive gains. Their social media followers jumped by 19%, merch sales shot up by 33%, and their stock price skyrocketed by 35%. However, just 3 years after those glowing reports, Juventus found itself in hot water. The club had to report to the prosecutor's office about a case involving financial fraud and falsified transfer reports. This scandal didn't just shake the club's reputation, it led to major changes in its leadership. A big part of this mess was tied to Cristiano's transfer and the legal drama that followed. Looking back, the bet on Ronaldo didn't pay off, neither on the field nor commercially. When you add up the transfer fee, agent commissions, bonuses, and his massive salary over 3 seasons, Cristiano cost Juventus a jaw-dropping 300 million euros. Sure, in the first year, the club's income rose by 45 million euros. Ronaldo brought in fresh sponsorships, boosted older contracts, and even helped matchday revenue climb, but it still wasn't enough. To make matters worse, Juve bombed out of the Champions League twice, failing to even make the semi-finals. By Ronaldo's second season, the club posted its biggest loss in 9 years, 90 million euros. And yeah, the pandemic hit them hard, slashing matchday revenue. In fact, for most of 2020, Italian media buzzed with rumors that Juve couldn't afford Ronaldo's colossal salary. If COVID restrictions had dragged into 2021, they might have had no choice but to offload him. In the end, the club's leadership did find a way to part ways with Ronaldo, but it came at a heavy price. For those executives in fancy suits, it cost them years of their careers. Juve found itself drowning in financial trouble and decided to cut corners to avoid even harsher penalties under financial fair play rules. To do this, the club's management made secret deals with several high-paid players. The plan? Spread out salary payments over multiple reporting years to make their expenses look smaller. Cristiano was part of this arrangement and agreed to delay receiving part of his salary. But last year, he demanded 20 million euros from Juventus, claiming it was money he was owed under the deal. He even took the matter to court, which partially ruled in his favor. But that wasn't the end of Juve's shady moves. The investigation also uncovered that club executives forged documents to claim tax deductions and inflated the club's value by over 150 million euros. They reported this as income from transfers in recent windows, when in reality it was a complete fabrication. That's how the shady football business really works. Wait a second, you're probably asking yourself right now, what's the point? I mean, didn't we just establish that the Glazers don't really care about the football side of things and are just using Manchester United for business deals? But if the club keeps racking up huge losses year after year, then what's in it for them? Are they even making money? It's easy to understand the Agnelli family's case. They've owned Juventus for generations, so it's more about legacy. But the Glazers? What's their angle? That's a solid question. And to break down these complicated financial details in a way that's simple and easy to get, I need your full attention right now. So, let's rewind to March 2nd, 2003, when the Glazer family bought their first small stake in Manchester United, a modest 3%. The head of the family, Malcolm Glazer, had already made a billion-dollar fortune in real estate. Before dipping their toes into football, they also purchased the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFL for around $200 million. Now, when it came to United, the Glazers played it smart and slow. Over the next year, they steadily bought up more shares in small batches, avoiding too much attention and preventing a spike in the stock price. By the end of 2004, they bring their portfolio to almost 30% and stop, because when this threshold is reached, the new shareholder of a public company is obliged to send other shareholders an official offer to buy the remaining 70%. Then, in the spring of 2005, the Glazers made their big move. They quietly purchased another 4 in larger chunks in just a few days, bringing their ownership to 75%. And when you hit that threshold, you can delist the club from the stock market without needing approval from the board of directors. That's exactly what they did in June 2005, making United a private company. Eventually, they would go on to own 100% of the club, but by then, it didn't really matter. And here's where things get really interesting. The Glazers spent about £800 million to buy the club, but here's the kicker. Most of that money wasn't even theirs. Nope, they took out loans, and guess what? They saddled that debt onto the club itself. For the first time since 1931, Manchester United was carrying debt on its books. Over the last decade, the club has spent a whopping £282 million just on loan interest payments. And it doesn't stop there. United is also the only Premier League club that regularly paid dividends to its shareholders instead of reinvesting that money back into the club. From 2016 to 2022, the Glazers pocketed about £160 million in dividends. Oh, and they've also cashed out by selling smaller chunks of shares in 2014 and 2021. Fast forward to the end of 2023, billionaire Jim Ratcliffe bought a 25% stake in United for £1,250 million. That means the remaining 70% of the Glazers' shares are now valued at around £3.5 billion. Let's do the math. They initially invested £300 million, and now, 20 years later, that's turned into a staggering £5 billion. Meanwhile, the club's total debt has ballooned to over £700 million. What a brilliant deal! As I mentioned earlier, the key to everything is controlling costs, and football authorities are trying to address the mess in the industry. No matter how much I've criticized UEFA in my previous videos, the idea behind financial fair play is actually a good one. Clubs should live within their means and avoid spending more than they earn. Sounds simple enough, but in reality, this rule is often bent or broken with all sorts of clever tricks. Take Manchester City, for example. While Juventus bypassed UEFA rules with fake reports, Sheikh Mansour took it a step further. For years, he essentially shuffled money between his own pockets, funding the club through fake companies. And every time, the punishments were pretty minor. The bigger issue is the close ties between football authorities and powerful people who depend on their decisions, creating massive conflicts of interest. Some club owners also manage sponsors and partners of UEFA and FIFA, so even indirectly, they can sway decisions. This means that when a big club is caught red-handed, UEFA often gives them countless chances to dodge serious punishment. Meanwhile, smaller clubs get hit with strict penalties without hesitation. At the same time, most top clubs don't like the idea of their spending being controlled. They're much more focused on boosting their revenue. Remember the Super League fiasco? That showed us that many clubs want more independence, not just in spending, but also in regulation and organization. They want to keep more of their earnings instead of sharing them with UEFA. But here's the kicker. Having the desire for independence isn't enough. You need a strategy, and the clubs behind the Super League clearly didn't have one. They relied on flashy slogans and nothing else. Here's another big question. Why does football even need to be profitable? For many, it's about passion, emotion, and culture. For some, it's politics, a tool for influence and soft power that doesn't necessarily need to make money. Even if it causes losses, owning a football club can boost the owner's other assets or prestige. And much like on the field, where unpredictability is what makes a match exciting, in the financial world, it's the fine line between profit and loss that keeps owning a club thrilling. Except if you belong to the highly calculating Glazer family.